Welcome to Flex Factor with Mark Navarro, the podcast that cuts through the noise to bring you the best strategies and insights in the co-working world. Produced by Spacespring. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Flex Factor podcast. First of all, before welcoming my guest, which I'm really excited about, I owe you an apology because in July we didn't record an episode. Life got a little bit overwhelming, and I hope that from now on we can get back to our regular monthly episodes. So apologies for that. But then the good news is that this month I have a super nice guest. So I would like to introduce you to Jenny Poon, and I think that I can do it with just 4 lines. Founded CO+HOOTS in 2010, named the Phoenix Business Person of the Year in 2016, ranked the 4th best co-working space in the US in 2017, and named one of Arizona's most influential women in 2018. But I believe that she will identify more with this description. Advocate for lowering barriers to entrepreneurship for underrepresented groups, women, people of color, refugees, through programming and partnership with schools, governments, and chambers. Personally, I prefer thinking of her as the embodiment of the phrase, be the change you wish to see in the world. Or in other words, she worked hard to make things easier for the people who come after her, especially in the areas where she or her parents, which are refugees, had to fight to move forward. Welcome, Jenny. It's a pleasure to have you on the Flex Factor podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Mark.
Yeah, it's a long time since we last talked.
Yeah. Gosh, when was
that? I know that I left a lot
Okay.
of things about you in the introduction. So could you explain a little bit more about you to the audience?
Yeah. I mean, Mark, I think you did a really good job, but other things I think that have informed the work that I do. You mentioned my parents. My parents are refugees. They're Vietnamese refugees that came to the US during the Vietnam War. And I was born in the US, but what I saw growing up was how much they struggled with becoming entrepreneurs, running their own business. They started a small restaurant just before I was born. And I saw them constantly struggle with running that business, managing people, just knowing other people that were entrepreneurs was really hard for them when they were in their business 24/7, right? And so that always stuck in my head. And they were always the first to be like, don't become an entrepreneur, don't start your own business. But then when I did what they told me to do, I went to school, I graduated, I got a full-time job, and then eventually I lost that job because of a recession. Times get tough eventually for everybody, and you are at the whim of an employer at that point. And so my employer at that time, I was the art director for the newspaper in the area. They shut down a bunch of the work that we were doing and let go of, a third to almost half of their staff at that time. And so I had to look for something else alongside a ton of other people, a whole generation of people looking for jobs. And I decided to start my own business at that point. CO+HOOTS was not the first business I started. I started a marketing agency. And out of that marketing agency, I kind of felt the same thing they felt, where I didn't know how to get help to run and grow this business. And so that's when I kind of fell into building a co-working space. But in 2010, co-working wasn't really a thing yet. And so I didn't know what to name it. I didn't know the structure of things. There were a handful of other co-working spaces at the time. So I went and just kind of put together what I thought would be helpful. I wanted, a space that would bring people together who are starting businesses, who were at the same stage, who are looking to hire, didn't know what systems or tools or what to do to be able to run efficiently as a single owner business. And then how to grow it from one person to multiple employees to generate revenue, and how do you do your taxes at the end of the year? All of those questions. So I started with just, running around in co-working space, coffee shops actually, and then discovered Jerome Chang from Blank Spaces, and found the small group of co-working spaces and quickly attached myself to them and been teach me what you know. And I launched my co-working space as well in Phoenix, which was the first in Phoenix. And it was in the middle of the recession, and there turns out to be a lot of people that want to start businesses in the middle of recessions because they also experience the same thing that I did. So that's really what carried me through, is like learning from my parents, seeing the challenge very deeply, like, and experiencing it personally, and then trying to find a solution to that. And turns out a lot of other people were struggling with the same problems I was struggling with. So that was Cahoots. Yeah, that's really what drove creation of Cahoots for the last 15 years.
I think that many entrepreneurs I met over the years, not only co-working owners, but other people, have been entrepreneurs in some way by accident. Like life drives you there. And your story with Cahoots actually resonates a lot to me with many, many, many founders around that era, right?
Yeah.
Like how to solve problems, how to be an entrepreneur, having a place, right? To do that and be surrounded by people who share your problems, right? After these, Cahoots for sure expanded to a second location, etc. So it worked well, and it's working well. But what would you say it was the secret recipe during those times to make the space successful?
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone who runs spaces or is in a space knows that it's really about connecting to the people. And that's a hard thing to replicate. It's a hard thing to train on, and it's a hard thing to scale. You can't use technology to scale people to people things very well. And so we have always focused on that. And it sounds very like pageantry to say, oh, we focus on people, right? Like, who doesn't? But there are specific things that we put in place in terms of culture to make sure that everybody felt welcomed and that they left feeling like they got something out of just being there for 5 minutes even. So little things like, if you enter our space, our staff is expected to let you leave with like a resource or a connection, right? And that's not just like, hey, culture wise, let's make sure we try to do that. It's actually in our documents. When you leave, like, we ask our team members to submit a like follow-up form. Anytime you come in, a new person comes into the space, there's a follow-up form that our team members complete to like just say, this person came in, this is what they're about. Let's tell everybody in our team about them. And then here's who I connected them with. Like, this is how we could have helped them moving forward. I think traditionally, if you think of organizations that run any kind of business, it's more about like sales. And those two things are actually probably pretty closely related. It's a thin line between that. But for us, like, it's not about selling, it's about finding the right people that are in this space. And so when somebody comes through and they have, we know they're struggling, they're also a business owner, there's something that they're trying to solve by being there. And it might just be physically space. But I think there's always more than that. And so we try to get under that problem. Like, yeah, you're trying to solve the space, but there's like, is it because you need financially like a space and you have staff members, right? So there's always like more than just space that you're trying to solve. And we try to discover that. And by discovering that, our team members try to connect them to like other people who can help them solve the bigger problems, whether that's like, I need a CPA, or I need the bookkeeper, or I need a web designer, I'm struggling with sales, or I need connections to the government, right? Like, there's all of these other things. And so we try to sit in that space of being, the connective tissue to other things that any entrepreneur might need. And again, thinking back to my parents who didn't have those resources. And oftentimes you are connected to who's closest to you. So if you come from an immigrant family, your connections usually are the immigrant communities who oftentimes aren't connected to the greater resources of our community, right? Like, they don't know the experts because they haven't been here that long, or they don't know the language. So how can we speed up those connections? How can we connect them to the resources faster than what they would have been able to get to if they were just on their own? So that's what we really focus on. And I think that shows. And it's not just about filling seats, right? Not just about filling desks within our space. So
when you said that you do the follow-up, it's clear to me that it's a willing to integrate the people. My point is that what I have seen many, many times is that when you go like to get a day pass in a co-working space, for example, you get a form not asking you only about invoicing, but asking a lot of questions about who you are, do you want to be connected with, and that kind of thing always have given me mixed feelings,
Yeah.
because on like I feel a little bit like interrogation, depending on how deep and the amount of questions, while your team, what is doing, it's approaching the people and trying to make real connections, like talking like people to people. You are in the same space, right? You
Yeah.
are signing up. Well, there. Uh, for me, it makes more sense your approach than the other approach, like to the digital sign up form with lots of questions.
Hmm.
With sometimes those questions do not deliver, so I don't get
Yeah.
any connection.
Yeah.
And I also
And
like
you
the
don't know
fact,
where it goes, right? You don't
yeah,
know who's reading it, and like your data is important. So why give it all up to somebody and you don't know what's going to happen with it? I get that.
yeah,
So yes, we don't ask those questions in a form. It's our staff members asking the anyone who walks through our space, how can we connect you? And it's connecting them before they leave the space. So like whether you come back or not, the goal is that you've left with a resource or something that can help you with your business, becoming a member or not.
yeah. Sorry, because all of this was a little bit confusing, but I thought it was worth it mentioning it, because it's a, well, I won't say a mistake, but it's a behavior that I see many, many times done, and I think that your approach comes closer to something that makes sense, at least in my mindset. But to take all this like dedication, like to work so hard to connect people, it takes a lot of time. So I think that you created some tools, some bots actually. You have been talking about this in CWSC 2019, actually. So you created a lot of bots to free your team from day-to-day tasks, right? So they can focus on people. Can you talk a
Yes.
little bit more about that?
Yeah, I'm a little bit obsessed with automation and bots. So yes, what you're referring to is my session at the co-working conference in Spain about how to use robots to automate your work in the co-working space. So I would preface that with like the reason for automation of so many things in our space is so that it frees up the time for our people to solely focus on people. Because I would walk into spaces. I mean, I visit co-working spaces all the time. I visit shared office spaces or executive suites all the time. And I see the staff members like taking out trash, and I see them wiping down tables, and I see them like caring for the space, which is beautiful and wonderful. And yes, absolutely should be. But I also think if that person was spending time, running programs or like being a part of actually helping a business owner in your space, how much more impactful would that be? Because personally, the people that come to our space are not, I mean, they want a nice space to be in, they want it to be organized, they want it to be clean, but they don't necessarily care if you spent $100 on this chair or if you spent $1,000 on this chair, right? They care if that experience in your space led them to getting more clients or getting new contracts, right? That is really what changes a business. And if we can't do that or help be a part of that or contribute to their learning, like we aren't helping them beyond just a desk and a space, like we're just a commodity then. And that's never something we want to be. And so I did create a lot of bots just because I've always grown up in this environment of how do you make things better? Like everything in a small restaurant, my mom ran a small restaurant. It could seat maybe 30 people, and she was the only one in the kitchen. So she had to be really efficient with prepping her food and how to get things out the door. And so I would watch her figure out how to automate in her own way, like the systems for delivery of food. And those were things, and she would do that all throughout our lives, right? Like in how she would manage finances, in how she would coordinate schedules, like everything was as efficient as it could possibly be. And so part of me cringes when something takes too long or like is too many steps. And so in running this business, there were things where I was like, I know what we all hate doing. I know we don't like doing these parts of the things. How can we remove that or automate it so we just spend less time on those things? And so, one of the things, if you're a co-working space manager, we bought, you might like this little tip. We bought these little flick buttons, and I think you can find them anywhere now, like these smart buttons. Basically, it's the IoT world, right? Like you can buy smart buttons, smart switches, those kinds of things. We programmed them to turn on and off coffee machines and to notify us when the bathrooms need to be like cleaned, if there was like an issue anywhere, because we were hearing from our staff that like when you sit at the front desk, you're constantly bombarded with things that need to be taken care of at the space, and you're not able to focus on the things that we know drive membership and drive community and drive support in small businesses. So they started listing out all these things that were like, just 5 minutes here or 10 minutes here or 30 minutes here adds up, and they never got anything done, right? Like I think we all feel that way regardless of whether you're working in a co-working space or not. Like you're just constantly bombarded with things. And so we started just picking away at some of those things. Like one of them was like coffee is important and people get mad if coffee runs out. And so how can we automate this process? And, at first it was, well, let's just buy 2 coffee machines and we'll have those running at the same time. But then like on very slow days, we just brewed 2 cups of coffee and threw it down the drain. And or not 2 cups, but like 2 giant urns of coffee and threw it down the drain because we also don't want old coffee the next day. And so we set up these like smart switches that connect to the coffee machines and buttons. So like if the coffee machine runs out, you can hit one, it'll trigger the next one, and it'll notify everybody that coffee will be made in 5 minutes, and our staff member only then has to replace the coffee once a day. It's such a simple thing, but if we're talking about how do we keep our staff members from constantly being pulled away from things, because I know I can't get anything done unless I have like 3 dedicated hours to focus on something. And so those were the moments that we've been trying to streamline. That's one simple thing. Like we automate, our communications and our cancellation process. Like we try to make sure that our staff is spending as much time as possible supporting our community than doing facility operations management. And there will always be the need for that, but as much as we can minimize it, the better.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned the coffee one because it's my favorite. At this point, I don't know I'm not sure if you opened the second location before the pandemic struck or after the pandemic struck, because this is where I'm lost because we lost contact for a few years.
So it took almost 3 years to launch our Mesa location. So we were about to sign to start construction in Mesa. It was like on the day that closure was happening, March 15th, 2020, was like the day we were planning to sign for a temporary space to then start construction on our actual space. But then the nationwide shutdown was announced and we shut down our spaces. We paused the construction. What was really frustrating with that was in all of 2019, after we announced we were going, because we're starting construction in 2020, it was supposed to be done by the end of 2020. And then we were supposed to be able to move in 2021, like end of 2020, beginning of 2021. But what was really frustrating is in 2019, we had announced and started pre-sales on our space, and we had signed up all of our offices in that time. So we pre-sold all of our offices, and then we had to essentially refund everybody because we thought that it was, let's wait 6 months, and then 6 months turned into a year, and then a year turned into a year and a half, and we were just like, we don't want to hold your money. Like so much has changed at this point. So in 2021, we refunded everybody that had put money down. And we said, if you wanted to continue on, we'll obviously like hold your spot, but it's going to be still another year before we are done with construction. And then all of the costs for construction doubled during that time because the market and the costs for everything doubled. We had to close our Phoenix space for that period of time, and we didn't even recover until I would say a whole year later. It was like June. I remember the period. It was the summer of 2021. after all of the, I think all of the vaccines rolled out, and I think families, parents had been homeschooling for a year, and it was June, and people were like, we are not doing this anymore. Like, we need to get out, we need a space. And suddenly, like, our space filled up in June, July of 2021. But it was a good, it was a good year and a half where it was pretty scary. We closed our space. We had a fantastic community manager that really helped us through it. She was very operations driven. She focused on like, how do we operate the best that we can while closed? And we did. We allowed some offices like to have one person, like distance, have one person in their spaces. We didn't open up the open space. We figured out how to let like the mail service people come into our space and drop off mail. So we still received packages and people came in for that. And this is where the community really stepped in. A lot of our offices said like, we work with a lot of the offices in our space are community driven organizations, nonprofits or organizations that are doing social impact work and are grant funded or are doing things that are greater for the greater community. And a lot of them had said, we already budgeted for this space. We will continue paying. It's fine. Even though all of our staff is remote working right now, we are fine. We'll continue to operate. So that was a real gift of a lot of our offices continued to pay their membership fees, even though they weren't really utilizing it.
Sorry to
And
interrupt
then,
you,
oh yeah,
but I think that here is where it makes sense to non-community driving people. It will make sense for them to understand that this
the
kind
value.
of bond that you have with your members goes beyond business, right? Because some people like business minded, and it's fine. You have to be business minded, but on the other hand, it's a business which has soul, and it's more than what you said. It goes beyond the membership, and that needs more work. Probably needs more staff. Needs more concern to like humans, not only about the space, but then when they're like real issues, then that bond, that it's a relationship much wider than manager to client, is when things make a difference, right?
Mm-hmm. And some of those things, because it is a culture, like it's cultural that you have these connections. Like the example I give a lot is when people feel like our space is their home, they treat it like their home. So when they come in, like we've seen members help us take out the trash, or like as they're walking into the space, they see trash on the floor and they're picking it up, or they see somebody had left a little bit of a mess, so they pick it up because it is also their home, And in the terms of the pandemic, when that happened, and we were left with like a very empty space. I remember walking into the space and being very like shocked with the experience of nobody being in the space. Because I remember when we first moved into our space, so long, like to rewind a little bit, in 2016, we purchased a building, and it was like something I never thought I would be able to do. But we purchased a building for our co-working space. Ran a crowdfund campaign. It was this big thing. Like I thought that like it was the end. I thought it was the end of COOTS because we couldn't get this loan that we had applied for. We kept getting declined and declined and declined. Finally, we got this loan for this building, but we didn't have enough to do a down payment, and we ran a crowdfund for it. And long story short, we raised the money. We're able to get into the space, but on the first day of moving into that space, like the first day we opened, I remember pulling up into the parking lot and being like, this will be the last time I ever see the space like this, meaning like with nobody in the parking lot, with nobody in the physical space, like not have been touched. Like it's that first like unwrapping of something. Like the first time you touch it, it's done, right? Like it's no longer brand new, untouched, right? And I remember like sitting there for a moment saying, I've got to remember this moment because it'll be the last time I see the space empty. And the pandemic, 5 years later, the pandemic happens, and I'm sitting there in the space and it's completely dead. And it's like your worst nightmare as a co-working space manager owner is like your space being completely empty and you don't know when it will ever get back to the way it was. And so I remember that moment and thinking like, what are we going to do? And fortunately, when we announced the closing and we waited, like we gave people the opportunity to freeze their membership, and, you know, come back in a couple of months and check in with us, or like pay now if you can and we'll extend. Like we gave all these different options. And a lot of people just were like, we're okay. We know that you guys are small business owners. Like you've been putting a lot of energy and effort into like helping us be successful. We will continue our membership in this time until we can, you know? And so, I mean, we have a co-working alliance in Phoenix, and a lot of us were talking about how they were doing. And there were some definitely very rough times for everybody, but we were kind of fine for the first, I think for the first 6 months. Like we really didn't struggle, even though we were closed. But as it went longer, like, you know, that's when it started to be like businesses were struggling. You could see it. Something that we thought was like that our community thought was a 6 month period turned into a year-long thing, and you can only hang on for so long without revenues, right? And so fortunately, our bigger companies continue to support. We definitely like were hit near the end of the year with a lot of losses, but we just hung in there. And you know, because we were pretty lean to begin with, we've always been a bootstrap business. Didn't have any major loan besides our building. And we were lean with standing up the organization and, you know, moving into the space. We were able to just weather that storm and until, you know, June of 2021 when everything actually came back for us.
And I know that during that time, you like created something new. Like you were, yes, like you're explaining this and you're really sad when you're talking about this. But then on the other hand, you find the time to help people in a different way, in a wider way. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I almost like I was so focused on the Kahoot story. Yes, so in the pandemic, after we closed everything, I had staff members, and I was like, gosh, what do we do with these? What do we do with them, right? We don't have to manage a physical space right now. We've set it up so that we can run, and we have a little bit of runway. And so I started just digging into my brain around things that I've been thinking about, and like revenue models or businesses or ideas of like, what's the need in this community? How do we do this in this time? And there has been this idea that has been kind of percolating in my brain for a while now. And it was this idea of how do we scale this idea of co-working without physical spaces? But not just like virtual co-working, not just, you know, a meetup every month. There were certain things in the space of co-working and more like ecosystem building and entrepreneurship support that I felt was really impactful over the years, right? Like we run educational programming every week. We host these meetups. We actively help businesses. We've moved into creating incubation programs. These were all things that were happening in our space. But I was seeing this when we run these types of programming, like we were getting just a lot of word of mouth and recognition for these events, that people from all over the state were starting to come to our events. I would hear people tell me that they drove in from like the northern area 3 hours to come to this event that was only an hour long, and then we're driving back. And I was like, oh my gosh, I wish there was a way that we could get this to you like in a more efficient way where you wouldn't have to spend 7 hours of your day to do this. And this was, if you'll remember, before Zoom was unanimous across the entire world. And so I was like, okay, could we do some virtual trainings to make this accessible? But there was one thing that like continued to be deep in my brain that I was like, I've seen people be really successful if they help each other. I've seen people be really successful if they can find the right person. And I've had a handful of these people that I've met and connected with that have completely changed my life and my business and how I do things. And I remember every one of them, and I remember every moment when they've helped me. And I'm like, how do we create those moments for other people who don't have connections to these people, right? Like, how do we make that happen when those circles don't overlap each other? And so in those moments when I was, when it was quiet and we had closed our space, I was thinking about what else could we do right now? And also seeing all these people struggle with how to navigate the government funding mechanisms that were put out there. I don't know what was happening in Spain or anywhere else around the world, but in the US, the government was trying to deploy a lot of funding support during the pandemic for small businesses. They came in the form of loans and they came in the form of different grant programs. And it's like they funneled it from federal government to states, and then the states had their own way to deploy it, and cities had their own way to deploy it, and everybody had their own application and forms and things like that. And all these small businesses that are like us, one or two owners and like up to 5 staff members, were trying to figure it out, right? And so that combined with what I was seeing at the time of like everybody needs, like it's very clear the kind of help that they need to pivot during this time. How do we use these funds that are coming down to help these businesses with the true thing that they need? Because money does help, but money with the right resources and the right people to direct you on how to use the money effectively is even better. And so that's where we really dug in and created HUUB, which is like I feel like it's the next generation of what we were doing with CAHOOTS, where it is this like virtual co-working space with resources. And the big thing is we take government funded programs or government dollars and deploy them to small businesses in the form of what's called technical assistance, which is where we find a bunch of experts who are incredible in their field, and we connect them to the small businesses that need their help, and we fund that support. So I'm sure you've heard of programs that are pro bono where like businesses can go talk to somebody and it's free because that person volunteered their time. And we love that. But also when you volunteer, oftentimes you don't take it very seriously. Like I would put a limit to how much I can do because I'm volunteering. I'm not going to build you a website, but I will help you, point you to the right place to maybe start your website. But in this time of need, businesses needed a lot more handholding. And that's what we had hoped to accomplish, is to shorten the steps to get that help, and to make it, because these businesses have been closed, make it easy for them to be able to get the help without further going in debt for a business that like at that point, they didn't know if it was even going to be able to continue. So we set up a system knowing how government operates and how much data they need and how much reporting and auditing they need. And oftentimes when you work with government, that is the biggest hurdle. Like there's kind of a joke that you spend like 75% of your time doing administrative work and 25% of your time actually doing the work you should be doing. And that is just not effective. And so we built systems to automate a lot of the process that was overwhelming in running programs like this, and then partnered with the governments to fund direct support to small businesses. That's really effective. It's like 95% of businesses that like get the help through our system find success. We have a constant like NPS score and reporting to show what they get out of it. Revenues increasing, lowered expenses, those types of metrics, which are things that, are important when you're looking at taxpayer dollars and how you're spending those dollars. So that's one big component, but then we've continually added to this, like we have a grant resource directory, we have funding elements. So if you're looking for ways to get venture capital or loans, that's all in our system, and it's all hyper local. So a big piece of that, just like in co-working, what we're trying to do is connect local people with local people. We find local experts to connect them with local business owners, and they just, they bolster each other, and it's this circle of economy that continues to give within a community. So a government can basically launch this type of support program in their community without necessarily having to do very much, because we've build a system that can run almost on its own.
And you started in Mesa?
We started in Mesa, in 2020, actually, in the middle of the pandemic. The city of Mesa put out a call to, for ideas of what could we do right now to help small businesses. And they left it pretty wide open, and they asked people just to like pitch solutions to help small businesses. And this had been the idea, like kind of percolating in my brain. And I was already building it. I was building the learning library. I was building the technical assistance. We called it advisor matching at the time, and we actually did that within our space. We have an advisor matching program, so I knew that it was effective. But business owners would pay for that service previously, and I wanted to get this out to everybody at as little cost as possible to the business owner, because they really couldn't afford very much at that time. So I really thought like the best way to get mass adoption to something is to deploy it through a government who has no bias, right? No interest, no financial interest in the businesses. Like they want them to be successful, but they don't need to take a cut of any revenues, right? And for us to also we don't need to generate massive income from a business owner, but it is a huge benefit to a community when thousands of businesses create jobs and increase their revenues. And in the form and perspective of government, they're constantly trying to keep businesses within their local community because that generates tax revenue. And they're also trying to keep businesses and talent here because that supports the greater community. And so if we can show that we make it really easy for them to do that, it's a no-brainer, right? To invest this little amount of money versus a lot of times they spend a lot of money trying to recruit the big corporations that create maybe 100 jobs in their community when they could support the masses and create 10 times the number of jobs for, a quarter of what they spend on trying to recruit these big companies.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. Actually, I think it's important what you mentioned about data, because I have seen so many entrepreneurs trying to do similar things. But when I ask for data, they usually tell me like, well, it's like you can choose in doing the impact or measuring the data. And I was like, yeah, we might be friends. With some of them, we are friends, and I do choose to trust you. But with that pitch, you're not going to, to make anyone, for sure, not in the public sector, like believe you, right? Because they need this data. And I think it's important to support public and private collaboration. But if I ask you, give us 5 tips for public-private collaboration, what would you say?
This podcast is proudly brought to you by SpaceSpring, your fast track to co-working space management.
I would say, and I can't speak for other countries or other cities, but I have been an advisor on a lot of international global incubation programs. And I will say that a lot of countries are really forward thinking with investing in partnerships with local entrepreneurs. And if you have a good idea that can prove, that has experience proving success, I don't know why they would say no, right? There's obviously a financial component to it. What worked for us is that cities are, in America, there's a big push for incubation and entrepreneurship. And I wouldn't say that it was that way 10 years ago or 15 years ago, because when I started COOTS, no one knew what co-working was. I had to explain why entrepreneurship was important, right? I can't tell you how many panels I've been on where we're talking about why it's important to build entrepreneurial spirit in communities. But it is now. And we can show the numbers around not just, hey, invest in big, flashy startup companies, but invest in your local coffee shop, invest in your local bookstore. They do generate money and they do employ people that creates economies for your community, right? There's value in that. And how you show that is the tax revenue or you show that by, and it might not be what a lot of governments want to hear, but testimonials. Like the best cities are built by having culture and community in close proximity to each other. And so if you ask people why they love neighborhoods that they're in, it's because of the local businesses. It's because there's a coffee shop there. It's because there's a bookstore there. It's because they know their neighbors and they feel safe there. And when you have businesses occupying areas and creating that culture, you create the best communities and people will stay. They'll patron local businesses, they'll support each other, and you don't have to do as much work. So I think you have to tell that story, but you can tell it with numbers. You can absolutely tell it with numbers. You can tell it by showing how many people come in and out of these coffee shops. If that coffee shop was not there tomorrow, like what would that neighborhood look like? And then what do you go to tout when other people are trying to look at places for tourism, right? So it is all very interconnected. So sorry, long story. Do collect the data, right? Any kind of data that you can, but the most important data for oftentimes government is the impact of economy and of jobs, which I hate to make that the focal point, but if you also realize that before you get to those two things, there's a whole bunch of other things that need to happen. You can start collecting some of those and pointing to, hey, having a coffee shop be successful in this area will lead to the job creation, will lead to bigger companies coming here. That is a metric that's worth sharing. And there are also a lot of tools. Like we operate in a time where there are so many tools that can help you do this. Like it wasn't like 2 decades ago when we had to manually collect all of these things and there wasn't an easy way to capture it. You can just do Google reviews and start collecting feedback on things, right? So it's pretty simple. Whenever there's an engagement between a business owner and an advisor, an automatic form goes out, just like an NPS score. Like you can find any free form that will automatically send. I think you can connect it into a Calendly account, any kind of form that would collect the information. And so after an engagement, we send out a form that says, how did that go? Like, please tell us a little bit more about how that engagement was. It's so simple, right? But it's really what you do with it after. And so because it's automated, we've collected hundreds of testimonials from each city, and that becomes a whole page, just like a Google review page, that lives publicly, that any government representative can now point to and say, I was a part of that. Like I helped bring that here, and now look at all these people that are being successful. And we want to say the numbers are the things that people are drawn to, but the reality is it's the human stories that people will remember. And so if you can point to, if you're talking about government, and our government works in districts, right? So you have a neighborhood, they go out and they visit that neighborhood regularly. And if you have that business owner as a testimonial on your page saying they met with this one advisor and that one advisor helped me double my revenues with just a $500 investment from the government by helping to pay for that meeting or that appointment that I had, that's a no-brainer for a government. And then you can do the numbers with $1,000 of investment per business created 1,000 jobs, those kinds of numbers is what you get to. And then they'll say, this is just there's an easy correlation to this level of investment and the job creation metrics that we're looking for.
I think I have a summary of what you said. Okay, so I don't know if it will be in order. We can discuss about that, but first, I think it will be understand your stakeholder in this kind public institutions, and one is they are focusing impact and jobs. Job creation, impact on economy, and job creation. Of course, you mentioned there's a lot of steps before that. Then gather data, and also quantitative data, which is super important because are facts, which are numbers, right? And then don't underestimate the impact of human stories, right? Mm-hmm. Because different kinds of public gets driven to data or to human stories, right? Some people don't care that much about data or don't understand data, then focus on local projects which keep everything into the community. Work on projects that develop areas because you want that traffic around the areas. So I think for you, a lot of has to be with physical businesses which have all these people around, and then deploy digital tools, deploy tools that are new but are not experimental anymore. They can be useful. You mentioned Google reviews or any other like kind of mainstream kind of tool that you can use and sometimes are underutilized.
I would add finding a champion in government. Like, you don't need to, I think politicians often fight with each other. You don't need to appease everybody, but you find the person that truly is invested in your industry. For us, it's entrepreneurship and small business. So who is a champion in government that wants small business entrepreneurship to be successful? And go get coffee with them, like learn about why they're passionate about this. Every politician for us or every government worker wants to look good. They want to be able to show that they're successful and good at their job. So if you find the person that is passionate about this, they will be your biggest champion and cheerleader and help you open doors, because it can be a very complicated.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned this. Actually, in many years ago, I was working for a company and I created a concept which is coworking for social return. And the company was finally able to do that with the Barcelona City Council. And I remember in the inauguration going to it was it's not a politician, but a guy working for the Barcelona City Council, and telling him thank you because you believed in this. Because when our CEO went to him and told him, yeah, no, we are not going to create what you ask us to do. We're going to create a co-working space. The guy, wanted to listen, right? And, they are like big city council. He could have said, no, thank you. I mean, you are a small company compared to us. We're not going to listen. So it really resonates to me, the champion pitch. I think it's important. And again, I think people sometimes underestimate human relations, right? If you don't have the time and you don't pay the attention and listen to people and understand, what they are worried about, because you mentioned like 2 or 3 times, like they want to be successful. They want to be like, I'm part of this, it's like, and sometimes it's a job that has lots of blockades, right? Because they have a lot of, methods to control everything to be sure that public function is done safely. The opportunity to make nice things sometimes it's scarce. So I think that it's also listening to them, understanding their needs, understanding what would make them happy and be successful because they are helping people. It's something that we can as privates do, right? Give the opportunity for them to help you to move forward and then help everyone in the city. And just one last question. How is HUUB doing today? I think you are already in several cities, right? 6, 7, or maybe more now.
Yeah, we're in over a dozen cities. We're in 5 states, mostly in the Southwest. So Arizona, Texas, California, and then all the way on the other side in Georgia. So we have a bunch of cities in each of those states. We're actively working on just expansion. We did just launch our new version of our product, which is a pretty big overhaul that we've been working on for the last year, which allows us to basically stand up our system pretty quickly. So we're hoping that this new rollout of our system will allow us to, one, lower the price point for governments, which would allow us to get more money to businesses directly, and then allow us to move a little faster. And so ideally, we've been kind of entertaining some also international applications in Canada and Mexico, and then some of the islands across Asia we've been looking at as well. But yeah, I think we're just trying to expand and find areas where, standing up a co-working space is a lot of heavy capital. And so could you do something in this earlier stage before that co-working space is necessary to help small businesses and entrepreneurs in incubation and finding the resources that they need? Because oftentimes a lot of resources exist, they just might not be easily found. So chambers of commerce have programs, loans through banks exist. You just don't know they're there. So can we help businesses navigate that without necessarily standing up, $1 million building to get them there? And also, many of them don't need the co-working space too. Like they operate a physical space themselves. They just need the benefits of a co-working space.
Yeah, amazing. What a nice thought to end our conversation. I'm super happy to have this interview with you. I think that you really are an amazing human being, like always trying to help others and doing meaningful things, not only inside the co-working space, but also trying to help those in your communities. And I'm happy also to, it's like 15 years ago, I started in this industry. And having this conversation is understanding that the spirit of co-working is still alive. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for being part of this amazing community, which is co-working all over the world. And I'm super happy to listen that HUUB is going successful, that it seems that it's the next big chapter and it's expanding internationally.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, Mark. I'm so glad to reconnect and be a voice on your podcast that's been standing strong forever too. And I hope we get to actually connect again in person, maybe at the next Spain conference. But yeah, so nice to see you again.
Yeah, for sure there will be opportunities. But yeah, I would love to see you again. Well, thank you very much. And for all those listening, see you next month.
SpaceSpring automates tedious tasks, boosts efficiency, and helps retain members. Are you ready to streamline your co-working space? Check out the links in this episode description to learn more.